Welcome to Resource on the Go, a podcast from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center on understanding, responding to, and preventing sexual abuse and assault. I'm Sally Laskey, NSVRC's Evaluation Coordinator. On today's episode, we take you to Mississippi to talk with staff from the Schaefer Center for Crisis Intervention, Ashley Bleckenship, and Kim Newell, as well as Leanne Griffin from the Family Crisis Services of Northwest Mississippi. They're here to talk about their sexual harassment prevention policy toolkit that they've developed for workplaces. It's wonderful to have you all with us on the podcast today. Could you please introduce yourselves to our audience?
Sure. Hi, Sally. My name is Kim Newell, and I am the Executive Director of the Schaefer Center for Crisis Intervention. And we are a standalone rape crisis center in Southeast Mississippi. We serve about 11 counties. 9 of those are rural. Um, and so the bulk of what we do, we're just one of 3 rape crisis centers in Mississippi who are not shelters, that we are standalone rape crisis centers.
Morning, I'm Leanne Griffin. I am the Executive Director of Family Crisis Services of Northwest Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. And like Kim, we are a standalone rape crisis center, but we are also a children's advocacy center. And we serve 10 counties in Northwest Mississippi, and 9 of those are rural.
Hello, I'm Ashley Blankenship. I am an LMSW and I have been with the Schaefer Center for about 3 years. I'm one of the therapists at the Schaefer Center, and with an emphasis on seeing those from rural county communities, and I also work on prevention projects and help facilitate Green Dot trainings.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's a lot of counties, folks.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see maybe if we could start with you, Kim. We've been exploring economic supports and creating safer workplaces on the podcast, and we were really excited to learn about your work on preventing workplace sexual harassment. Could you talk to us about how this collaborative project came about?
Yeah, Sally, it's been several years ago. It's kind of a humbling story, but I was renewing our liability insurance, as I did every year, and they sent me a note back, and I don't even think they realized we were a rape crisis center, but they were telling me you need a more detailed sexual assault, sexual harassment policy. And, at first I was like kind of put off. And like, you do know we're a rape crisis center, right? That and they gave us a series, some questions that they wanted answered. Like, who would we refer to if we were a sexual, if one of our staff was sexually assaulted, or a list of things that I really had not spent that much time thinking about because we're so busy doing for others and not really thinking about what would happen if something happened to one of our staff or if they had some sort of complaint. And I also started thinking, just from a leadership perspective, we needed to have a stronger sexual assault policy in our policies and procedures. So I started asking around and looking around, and I noticed that, especially for smaller agencies, there weren't a lot out there. So it was not long after that, of course, I beefed up our policy some. I dug into whatever resources I could, enough to satisfy our liability insurance. And about that time, RPE started, our RPE person started talking to us about using policy as prevention and thinking outside the box of ways that we could do that and use policy as a strategy for risk reduction. So we started talking about it, and I got with Leanne because, like I said, we're one of just three that are standalone rape crisis centers. We're very similar in structure, and we talked about the possibility of coming together and creating a toolkit with lots of different pockets that could be resources for small agencies and or organizations or businesses up to even larger businesses that may want to update their policies and have a number of resources to go with that, like social media posts and different things like that. So that's kind of where we started, and we implemented that as one of our RPE strategies together.
And just for listeners who might be new to the podcast, RPE stands for the Rape Prevention Education Program, and that is the main federal funding source for sexual violence prevention in the U.S. I love the origin story that you shared. It does remind me of, the cobbler's children don't have shoes, right?
Exactly.
And we really have been talking a lot within the RPE program about, we have to start with our own organizations, especially as we're looking at effective policies and supports to both survivors of sexual violence, but also for our prevention work. So thank you so much for giving that background. I'm wondering, Leanne and Kim, could you share what the benefit has been about collaborating across so many miles on this project?
Well, as Kim mentioned, our programs are so similar. Kim and I have known each other for about 2 decades now. We were both infants when we started in this work. But so we've always kind of relied on each other back and forth to talk through things and, to really what works for our center, what's working for y'all. And so, I mean, it's been easy working together across miles because pretty much we work together at least once a week on something. It may be that, a grant that's coming up and we're trying to process those things. And it's so nice to have a common person that you can rely on to talk about, what's going on and how do I make this work better. And as Kim was talking about, even with the policies and things, one thing that we together decided that we would do for our staff is if Kim had staff members that needed mental health services, she could refer them to us and that we would do the same thing so that we're taking care of our staff and that we're knowing that they're getting, that trauma informed care. And, so that we're not just looking outside of other businesses. Like you were talking about the cobbler's children, they need the shoes too. And so it's been a great relationship. And, I'm hoping that there's other projects that, we can, come up with in the future to continue to do this. And I'm hoping that, other rape crisis centers, that they can use this tool. I know the couple of places that we've, talked to, like they've been very interested in getting this implemented. So, I hope that not just the outside folks, but those within our victim services realm. Kim, is there anything else that you can think
No,
of
Leanne, I think
about the collaboration?
yeah, I will say that, I mean, maybe we take it for granted, I guess, that because I have known other organizations that are more competitive and less collaborative, but we really work from the perspective that, I mean, why each do your own thing when we can put our brains together and come up with one really good thing, right? And so, yeah, that we have gotten into the practice of really collaborating a lot on different projects across the state.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have met you all. You're reminding me of that time early on when I was working at a rape crisis center, and all of a sudden I realized I can call my sister programs. Like they're
Absolutely.
probably having the same issue. And I bet they've figured some of this out. Like knowing that it's not that collaboration really can make the work a lot easier and, like you said, improve
A lot better.
the
Yeah.
work. Absolutely.
Brains are always better than one. Three brains are better than two. So the more input we can get, obviously, the better product we're going to have to deliver.
Well, speaking of brains, I had the opportunity to connect with Ashley a few times and learned, Ashley, that you really love policy. And I know our listeners, they're going to want to know, like, they want to know the stuff. What's all the stuff in this toolkit? So could you walk us through what you decided to include in the toolkit?
Yes. So when developing this project, I focused on like making workplace policies more accessible and user friendly, particularly for those who may be like reluctant to engage in like the complex policy language. So this toolkit includes two adaptable sample policy templates designed to meet the needs of different workplaces and organizations. I create a checklist to help organizations with existing policies like assess whether they meet the federal requirements because Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits sexual harassment, only applies to employees with 15 or more employees, employers with 15 or more employees. So I created the checklist to help ensure that those who have more than 15 employees meet those requirements, and also created one for those with less than 14 employees to help ensure that the policy works with state and local laws. So the toolkit also includes like two customizable sample policies that can be tailored to fit an organization's specific needs. And to support implementation and awareness, I designed posters that can be edited to display in like common areas, as well as visual materials like Ms. Kim was talking about that help reinforce the policy and increase employee understanding of what exactly constitutes a sexual harassment. And I also included links to specific trainings in Mississippi that employers and organizations can utilize that talk about what sexual harassment looks like and how to prevent that.
I love that you included not just the nuts and bolts around policy and things that can be customized, but all of the visual components that
Hmm.
really take folks outside of that the long list of black and white that are often posted in
Hmm.
common areas without that are very hard to engage with. The
Yeah.
type is very small. Like you really brought the not just the policy to life, but like the intent of the
Hmm.
policy to life. So I really appreciated that. So what do each of you hope this toolkit will do to support workplace leadership in creating safer workplaces?
I can go first. So, with me, my hope is that the toolkit gives employees the resources they need to feel safe and supported in reporting sexual harassment in the workplace. At the same time, I hope that this toolkit helps reinforce the seriousness of sexual harassment by clearly outlining expectations of staff and consequences if violation happens. But I guess my ultimate hope is a strong commitment to like accountability and sexual harassment prevention in the workplace where the toolkit helps like deter harassment before it even happens.
And I hope that, like, with this document, that it's not just something they put on the shelf, that they continue to have it as a living document. And I think the way that it's been done, it should be simplified enough to do that.
Mhm.
And it's not just a bunch of words that, you put on paper for, like Kim was talking about, the liability insurance, like we create something and then do we actually follow those guidelines? And I think the way that this toolkit has been designed, that it's going to make it easier for leaders in the workplace to do that and for the employees to know it's not a bunch of legal jargon. This is actually their right. And so I just hope that, it becomes a living document in all these workplaces that get a hold of the toolkit.
And the only thing that I'll add, because I mean, those are obviously the gist, but we do a lot of our prevention effort is doing green dot bystander trainings, which part of that is reactive green dots, reactive bystander kind of training. But the other part of it is changing the social norms around sexual violence. And I think by agencies and employees implementing these policies, that you're saying to the community, not only your employees, but to the community at large, that sexual assault is not okay, that we are a part of changing those norms, that it's not acceptable in our community. And that in itself, just the presence of doing that, and that's one of the reasons that Ashley included like social media, not just the posters, but social media slides that businesses and other organizations, maybe during sexual assault awareness, they post those. Because I mean, we post it all the time, but it's like preaching to the choir, right? So if you have other groups pulling from their toolkits that have a whole nother audience, then not only are people getting those messages, but they're getting the message that this organization doesn't tolerate interpersonal violence. And so I'm thinking, for me, it's just another step in the direction of changing the norms in our community.
Fabulous. That's really powerful. You all shared fabulous insights on what you hope the toolkit will be used for. What do you recommend to other sexual assault programs that are looking to engage workplaces in sexual harassment prevention efforts?
I guess for me, like the only recommendation I could think of is just to be assertive in efforts to go to local businesses and organizations to make sure they have some sort of policy in place that promotes like safe work environments free of sexual harassment.
I
I was
love,
gonna say, get you an Ashley that like loves policy, that, that this is their forte of their loving to do this type of work. And, or they can use our toolkit, that and modify it to make it their own based on their own community needs. Because we've got a great foundation.
Yes.
And like, so I think that it's something that's very user friendly, that's ready to be adapted to other communities.
If you make improvements, let us know so we can continue to improve. Yes, I am very lucky that I have Ashley as a colleague. She did a wonderful job with pulling all this together. The other thing that she did that wasn't mentioned too is part of the toolkit is a brochure about the toolkit. So, and we've printed that out so that we can go when we're out at health fairs or community fairs, and even like on campuses, because each student organization has their own policies. And we want to make sure that even student organizations make an inclusion of some sort of sexual assault policy in their organizations. So that's the only printed part of the toolkit that we give out is this sample brochure that leads them to the actual toolkit. The other thing that Leanne and I discussed as far as dispersing and trying to get where we're at now is just, letting the resource be known is start with the partners that you know. And, we're both United Way agencies. So one of the things that we talked about, let's just start with United Way and give them the toolkit and let them share it with other organizations. So there's nothing better than word of mouth and getting the resources out.
Well, I think something to add to Kim that I don't think either one of us mentioned in our introductions. Both of us are in major college towns here in Mississippi. So the University of Mississippi Ole Miss is here in Oxford, and Kim is in Hattiesburg with University of Southern Mississippi. So, reaching those student organizations, for people in college towns is another, great avenue to go down. Because as we know, student populations that 18 to 24, like they're at great risk for sexual violence, sexual harassment, and and also they can help pass it to the next generation, and help to encourage people as they learn about these things.
Well, you make a great connection to our other podcast, which was about youth in the workplace too. And I really appreciate all of your time. Thank you for bringing to the podcast stories about connection and collaboration and the sense like we have the know-how to do this even as small organizations, and working together and looking at the power of organizational level policy being so important to doing that norms and culture change that Kim talked about. I thank you all so much for being on the podcast, and thank you for allowing the NSVRC to help share this tool with folks. I think there'll be a lot of interest, and we'll share more information in our show notes. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Resource on the Go. For more resources and information about preventing sexual assault, visit our website at nsvrc.org. Connect with us by emailing resources at nsvrc-respecttogether.org.